confidential knowledge. Text number 11. Avajananti mam mudhaha avajananti mam mudha manushim tanum ashritam manushim tanum ashritam param bhavam ajanantah param bhavam ajananto mama bhuta maheshwaram mama bhuta maheshwaram avajananti mam mudha manushim tanum ashritam param bhavam ajananto mama bhuta maheshwaram avajananti mam mudha manushim tanum ashritam param bhavam ajananto mama bhuta maheshwaram avajananti mam mudha manushim tanum ashritam param bhavam ajananto mama bhuta maheshwaram avajananti mam mudha manushim tanum ashritam param bhavam ajananto mama bhuta maheshwaram
avajananti mam mudha manushim tanum ashritam param bhavam ajananto mama bhuta maheshwaram
avajananti mam mudha manushim tanum ashritam param bhavam ajananto mama bhuta maheshwaram avajananti mam mudha manushim tanum ashritam param bhavam ajananto mama bhuta maheshwaram. Line. Avajananti mam mudha manushim tanum ashritam param bhavam ajananto mama bhuta maheshwaram. Avajananti derived. Mam me. Mudaha foolish men. Manushim in a human form. Tanum body. Ashritam assuming. Param transcendental. Bhavam nature. Ajanantaha not knowing. Mama my. Bhuta everything that be. Maheshwaram supreme proprietor. Translation and purport is Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Translation. Fools deride me when I descend in the human form. They do not know my transcendental nature and my supreme dominion over all that be. Translation with repetition. Fools deride me when I descend in the human form. They do not know
They do not know
my transcendental nature
my transcendental nature
and my supreme dominion
and my supreme dominion
over all that be.
over all that be.
Purport by Srila Prabhupada.
Jai Shri Prabhupada.
From the other explanations of the previous verses in this chapter, it is clear that the Supreme Personality of Godhead, although appearing like a human being, is not a common man. The personality of Godhead, who conducts the creation, maintenance, and annihilation of the complete cosmic manifestation, cannot be a human being. Yet there are many foolish men who consider Krishna to be merely a powerful man and nothing more. Actually, he is the original Supreme Personality, as is confirmed in the Brahma Samhita. Ishvaraha Paramaha Krishna is the Supreme Lord. There are many Ishvaras, controllers, and one appears greater than another. In the ordinary management of affairs in the material world, we find some official or director, and above him there is a secretary, and above him a minister, and above him a president. Each of them is a controller, but one is controlled by another. In the Brahma Samhita, it is said that Krishna is the supreme controller. There are many controllers, undoubtedly, both in the material and spiritual world. But Krishna is the supreme controller, Ishvaraha Paramaha Krishna, and his body is Satchidananda, non-material. Material bodies cannot perform the wonderful acts described in previous verses. His body is eternal, blissful, and full of knowledge. Although he is not a common man, the foolish deride him and consider him to be a man. His body is called here Manushim because he is acting just like a man. A friend of Arjuna's, a politician involved in the battle of Kurukshetra. In so many ways, he is acting just like an ordinary man, but actually his body is Satchidananda Vigraha, eternal bliss and knowledge absolute. This is confirmed in the Vedic language also. Satchidananda Rupaya Krishnaya. I offer my obeisances unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead Krishna, who is the eternal blissful form of knowledge. There are other descriptions in the Vedic language also. Tam Ekam Govindam. You are Govinda, the pleasure of the senses and the cows. Satchidananda Vigraham. And your form is transcendental, full of knowledge, bliss, and eternity. Despite the transcendental qualities of Lord Krishna's body, its full bliss and knowledge, there are many so-called scholars and commentators of Bhagavad Gita who deride Krishna as an ordinary man. The scholar may be born an extraordinary man due to his previous good work, but this conception of Sri Krishna is due to a poor fund of knowledge. Therefore, he is called Mudha. Only foolish persons consider Krishna to be an ordinary human being because they do not know the confidential activities of the Supreme Lord and his different energies. They do not know that Krishna's body is a symbol of complete knowledge and bliss, that he is the proprietor of everything that be, and that he can award liberation to anyone. Because they do not know that Krishna has so many transcendental qualifications, they deride him. Nor do they know that the appearance of the Supreme Personality of Godhead in this material world is a manifestation of his internal energy. He is the master of the material energy. As has been explained in several places, Amamaya Duratyaya, he claims that the material energy, although very powerful, is under his control, and whoever surrenders unto him can get out of the control of this material energy. If a soul surrendered to Krishna can get out of the influence of material energy, then how can the Supreme Lord, who conducts the creation, maintenance, and annihilation of the whole cosmic nature, have a material body like us? So this conception of Krishna is complete foolishness. Foolish persons, however, cannot conceive that the personality of Godhead, Krishna, appearing just like an ordinary man, can be the controller of all the atoms and of the gigantic manifestation of the universal form. The biggest and the minutest are beyond the conception. So they cannot imagine that a form like that of a human being can simultaneously control the infinite and the minute. Actually, although he is controlling the infinite and the finite, he is apart from all this manifestation. It is clearly stated concerning his Yogam Aishwaram his inconceivable transcendental energy, that he can control the infinite and the finite simultaneously, and that he can remain aloof from them. Although the foolish cannot imagine how Krishna, who appears just like a human being, can control the infinite and the finite. Those who are pure devotees accept this, for they know that Krishna is the supreme personality of Godhead. Therefore, they completely surrender unto him and engage in Krishna consciousness, devotional service of the Lord. There are many controversies amongst the impersonalists and the personalists about the Lord's appearance as a human being. But if we consult Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, the authoritative text for understanding the science of Krishna, then we can understand that Krishna is the supreme personality of Godhead. He is not an ordinary man, although he appeared on this earth as an ordinary human. In the Srimad Bhagavatam, first canto, first chapter, when the sages inquired about the activities of Krishna, it is stated that his appearance as a man bewilders the foolish. No human being could perform the wonderful acts that Krishna performed while he was present on this earth. When Krishna appeared before his father and mother, Vasudeva and Devaki, he appeared with 4 hands. But after the prayers of the parents, he transformed himself into an ordinary child. His appearance as an ordinary human being is one of the features of his transcendental body. In the 11th chapter of the Gita, also it is stated, Teneva Rupena, etc. Arjuna prayed to see again that form of 4 hands. And when Krishna was thus petitioned by Arjuna, he again assumed his original form. All these different features of the Supreme Lord are certainly not those of an ordinary human being. Some of those who deride Krishna, who are infected with the Mayavadi philosophy, quote the following verse from the Srimad Bhagavatam to prove that Krishna is just an ordinary man. Aham sarveshu bhuteshu bhutatma avastitaha sada. The Supreme is present in every living entity. Bhagavatam 3.29.21. We should better take note of this particular verse from the Vaishnava Acharyas like Jiva Goswami instead of following the interpretation of unauthorized persons who deride Krishna. Jiva Goswami, commenting on this verse, says that Krishna, in his plenary expansion as Paramatma, is situated in the moving and the non-moving entities as a super soul. So any neophyte devotee who simply gives his attention to the Arshamurti, the form of the Supreme Lord in the temple, and does not respect other living entities, is uselessly worshipping the form of the Lord in the temple. There are 3 kinds of devotees of the Lord, and the neophyte is in the lower stage. The neophyte devotee gives more attention to the deity in the temple than to other devotees. So Jiva Goswami wants that this sort of mentality should be corrected. A devotee should see that Krishna is present in everyone's heart as Paramatma. Therefore, everybody is the embodiment or the temple of the Supreme Lord. And as such, as one offers respect to the temple of the Lord, we should similarly properly respect each and everybody in whom the Paramatma dwells. Everyone should therefore be given proper respect and should not be neglected. There are also many impersonalists who deride temple worship. They say that since God is everywhere, why should one restrict himself to temple worship? But if God is everywhere, is he not in the temple or in the deity? Although the personalist and the impersonalist will fight with one another perpetually, a perfect devotee in Krishna consciousness knows that although Krishna is the Supreme Personality, he is all-pervading, as is confirmed in the Brahma Samhita. Although his personal abode is Goloka Vrindavana, and he is always staying there, still by his different manifestations of energy and by his plenary expansion, he is present everywhere in all parts of the material and spiritual creation. Thus ends the Transcendental Bhaktivedanta purport. Om Ajnana Timirandasya Jnananjana Chakshurmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Namah Vishnu Padaya Krishna Preshtaya Bhutale Srimate Bhakti Vedanta Swami Niti Namine. Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Paschatya Deshatarine. Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda. Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. So this is perhaps one of the longest purports. Or I don't know if there's anything else which is more larger than this purport. So that also signifies the importance of this verse and why Prabhupada is writing so many aspects of understanding this verse. As we can see, Prabhupada is also emphasizing that there is always a controversy between the two classes of transcendentalists. So Prabhupada says broadly the transcendentalists can be divided into two categories, the personalists and the impersonalists. The personalists are those who, with all of their energies, engage in the service of the Lord, whereas impersonalists do not directly engage in the service of the Lord, but rather they try using mental speculation to meditate on the Brahman aspect of the Lord. There's always a controversy, and therefore both classes of transcendentalists, especially using a very significant literature like Bhagavad Gita, they try to propagate their viewpoint. And therefore, there is always some sort of controversy, and especially verses like this are quite significant. And therefore, Srila Prabhupada is giving a very detailed understanding so as to refute the arguments of the Mayavadis and to establish Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Although we see that Prabhupada establishes in every verse, and even more so wherever the words aham, mam appears, Srila Prabhupada even more emphatically emphasizes that this is actually Krishna, Supreme Personality of Godhead. And this is one such other verse where the emphasis on the Supreme Lord as Krishna as the Supreme Personality of Godhead is again reiterated. And so this verse says, Avajananti ma mudha. So mudha, the foolish men or foolish people, they do something. And Prabhupada also mentions in his lecture, like this is a criteria to understand who are fools. So we often see Prabhupada translating, saying sometimes fools and rascals. So actually Prabhupada is stating Krishna's own words. Krishna is saying here, who are those foolish and rascals? So basically, it may look very derogative in the first hand when one hears these two words, but actually what it means is that they're lacking in knowledge and they're not intelligent enough. And there is a reason why that is being said so, that we will look as we go further. So the criteria is that these foolish men or less intelligent men, they deride Krishna or they do not understand Krishna. So Prabhupada uses this as a criteria. Prabhupada says, anyone who worships Krishna, anyone who understands Krishna and serves Krishna is actually intelligent. And anyone else who's not doing this is not intelligent, but rather mood or foolish. Now, in this specific case, not only people are not worshipping Krishna, but they're deriding him, they're disrespecting him, they're belittling him, they're trying to equate him with another human being, another common man. And this is especially so when I descend in the human form, Manushim Tanumashritam. So when Lord assumes the human form in this material world, people think that, oh, he's another common man. And sometimes, as we see in the purport, Prabhupada says, some people think he's a very powerful person. Or some people think that he's in the mode of goodness. He's in the higher state of mode of goodness. Or in this way, different people have different conception of who the Lord is when he appears in this material world in the human form. Now, why is that these people think in this way? Why is that they consider the Supreme Personality of Godhead to be another common man? That is because Param Bhav Ajananto. Ajanantaha means not knowing. And What are they not knowing? They are not knowing two important things. That is Param Bhavam, the transcendental nature of the Lord. So Param, Prabhupada translates as translated, transcendental, and Bhavam as nature. So there is a significant difference between the material nature and the transcendental nature or Param Bhavam. And secondly, the foolish people also do not recognize this another very important characteristics of the Supreme Lord, that he is Bhuta Maheshwaram. He is the proprietor of everything that be. That means he is actually the proprietor of both the material and the spiritual existence. He is not an ordinary man. So because people do not recognize that he has a transcendental nature, which is not like the ordinary mundane material nature that a living entity who is having a material body possesses, but rather he is all transcendental. And then he is also the supreme proprietor. He is the supreme controller of all that be, both material and spiritual. So not knowing this, one mistakes the Supreme Lord to be an ordinary man. Prabhupada gives various examples and reasons to understand how the Lord Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead and how people in different ways misunderstand him. So first thing Prabhupada mentions is that if you look at the previous verses, so for example, the previous verse itself, one verse before this, Maya Dakshena Prakriti Suyate Sacharacharam. So in that verse, Lord is saying that Maya Dakshena Prakriti. So it is under my direction that this material nature is working. So it is not that the material energy is working just like that. It is working under my direction, under the Supreme Lord's direction. So as we know that the material energy is insurmountable. It is just so amazing how this material existence, which is filled with so many planets, so many different variegated kinds of energies of the Lord, as we see the 5 kinds of gross elements, 3 kinds of subtle elements, material elements, how they manifest so many different things. And it is also very difficult for a living entity to cross over the influence of this material nature. Now, that material nature, no living entity can control and say that I can govern the material energy as I want. We might be able to do some things, move some things here and there, and maybe construct a house, a skyscraper, a factory, a machine, a mobile phone. But all these things fundamentally are again the gifts of the Lord in the sense that none of the basic elements of whatever we are manufacturing are ours. Prabhupada says, like a carpenter, the wood is given by the Lord or the master, and he is just carving it. Similarly, we may be rearranging, reconfiguring the material elements in a certain way and claim ourselves to be some sort of masters of this material energy, but actually we are under the clutches of the material energy. Whereas the Supreme Lord is not under the clutches of material energy, but rather he is the one who is directing the material energy, the material nature. Furthermore, we also saw the word Matstani and how that everything that is created, Lord says that he is pervading all over, he is everywhere, everything rests on him. At the same time, is aloof from all of this. So Prabhupada, very in the beginning, says that the Supreme Lord, in just the previous verses, is saying that he is the one who is conducting this creation, maintenance, and annihilation of the complete cosmic manifestation. So if he is the one who is doing all these things, can we say he's an ordinary person? Can any one of us do any of these things? Can we create this cosmic manifestation? Can we maintain it? Can we annihilate it? No, we cannot. It cannot be of any common man. We never see a common man doing any of these things. So how then we can say that if we accept Bhagavad Gita as it is, as what is being said in Bhagavad Gita, and clearly the previous verses are talking about the wonderful qualities of the Lord, of how He is manifested this entire world, how He is pervading, yet how He is aloof. This is not something that we can do. We are so limited ourselves that we cannot create anything, but rather we are created. So, in that sense, this first aspect that the Lord being able to create, maintain, and annihilate this cosmic manifestation, that itself is an indication, is a sufficient reason for one to understand that he is not a common man. But sometimes people foolishly think, especially Mayavadis, they think that the Lord is a powerful man, nothing more than that. But actually, you have to worship the person, the spirit inside Krishna. Krishna is not the supreme, but one who is inside Krishna is the supreme. And they assume that the Lord, when he appears in this material world, he also appears in a material body like ours. So this is another misconception. So first is that they do not recognize the wonderful creation of the Lord and his maintenance and annihilation. Second, they also misunderstand the nature of his body. So Prabhupada explains this by quoting different Vedic verses, where Prabhupada says that Satchitananda Vigraha, that even in the Vedic language, this which we see, Ishvaraha Paramaha Krishnaha, Satchitananda Vigraha, which is mentioned in Brahma Samhita, Prabhupada states a similar point from other Vedic literatures by saying Satchitananda Rupaya Krishnaya. So the nature of Krishna's body is always full of eternity, bliss, and knowledge. His existence is not like that of a human being. Tamekam Govindam, you are Govinda, the pleasure of the senses and the cows, Satchitananda Vigraham, and your form is transcendental, full of knowledge, bliss, and eternity. So this aspect of understanding that the Supreme Lord's body is spiritual is very difficult. Actually, this is because we are so much conditioned by our material existence that we actually cannot understand that the Lord can exist when he comes in this material world, can exist very different from us. He is not like us. It is very difficult for us to comprehend. And this becomes especially more difficult for people who are gross materialists. So it is said, even when Rishabhadeva appeared, it was very difficult for people to understand as who he is. And therefore, he himself explains the nature of his own body and his existence. And in that, he says that the gross materialist, seeing everything to be material, they cannot understand that there is something which is spiritual at all. That is, they do not even understand that they are a spirit soul within this body. So for them, it is everything is material, and they are so much covered that they can never appreciate the transcendental nature of the Lord. The second category of people, who are the mental speculators or the jnanis, they are slightly better than the gross materialists in that sense that they understand there is something spiritual. And they understand that they are not this body, they are spirit soul, but their understanding about the nature of the Supreme Lord when he descends to this world is faulty, and their understanding of the nature of the Supreme Lord as who he is also faulty, because they are using the method of mental speculation. Therefore, these two categories of people, for them to understand the nature of the transcendental form of the Lord is not possible. Because the mental speculators, they just want to invert everything against material. So they see materialism and they just want to inverse it completely and think that everything is spiritual. And only you are an illusion. As soon as illusion goes away, you see everything is Brahman. So they are on the opposite poles of materialism. So even for them to understand that the Lord has a transcendental body is not possible, but only for one who renders devotional service, for only one who is purified from the lower modes of material nature and who is by rendering devotional service, can only one understand these transcendental aspects, the confidential aspects of the Supreme Lord. Otherwise, it is not possible for one to know. This is the reason why most people cannot understand who the Supreme Lord is. In the 13th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, there is the description about the nature, the enjoyer, and the consciousness. And there also the word ajadataha is used. That means people who do not know. But then a certain solution is given as how people who do not know can actually know the Supreme, in this case, the Super Soul, in this verse, but how they can know actually the nature of the Supreme Lord. So there it is said, Anyetva evam ajadataha Shrutvanyebhya upasate te api cha chati taranti eva mrityum shruti parayanaha. Again, there are those who, although not conversant in spiritual knowledge, begin to worship the Supreme Person upon hearing about him from others. Because of the tendency to hear from authorities, they also transcend the path of birth and death. So this verse is talking about people who are not having knowledge about the Supreme Lord. How will they understand about the Supreme Lord? So the word that is being used is Shrutva Anyebhyaha. So Shrutva Anyebhyaha, that means when heard from others, but here Prabhupada explains the word others refers to the authorities. And Prabhupada says, especially for modern society, for today's society, where there is no education about the spiritual knowledge, this verse is very applicable. And Prabhupada states how Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, who preached this Krishna consciousness movement, has particularly emphasized on hearing from the authoritative sources, because if the commonness in the modern world gave great stress to hearing, because if the common man simply hears from authoritative sources, he can progress, especially according to Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, if he hears a transcendental vibration, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. It is stated, therefore, that all men should take advantage of hearing from realized souls and gradually become able to understand everything. The worship of the Supreme Lord will then undoubtedly take place. Lord Chaitanya has said that in this age, no one needs to change his position, but one should give up the endeavor to understand the absolute truth by speculative reasoning. So Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu is projecting these two ideas of both mental speculation and the gross materialists. Gross materialists are anyway discarded, for they cannot understand the Supreme Lord. But the mental speculation is another aspect which prevents one from understanding this transcendental confidential aspects about the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So the Shrutva Anyebhyaha. So by hearing Hare Krishna Mahamantra and by hearing from authoritative sources, that's why Prabhupada is stating that Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has emphasized that for the advancement in this age, hearing is the most important thing. Without hearing, we cannot understand how the Lord has something which is inconceivable for all of us. Because we only see material beings around us, so we mistake that everything in this existence is also like that. Therefore, it is unless we don't hear from a pure devotee from the Shastras that there is something known as Vishnu Tattva, there is Shakti Tattva, there is Jiva Tattva. So there are different categories of beings, and whereas the Supreme Being is of a different category, he has different transcendental attributes, and which are very much different from the Jiva Tattva. So unless we don't hear this from authoritative sources, from bona fide spiritual masters, we can never understand these truths about the transcendental Lord. transcendental qualities of the Lord. So, if one is fortunate enough to take shelter of a pure devotee, hear from him about self-realization, and follow in his footsteps, will gradually be elevated to the position of a pure devotee. So, this verse is basically mentioning is that uh, if we simply hear about the process of self-realization from a pure devotee and follow in his footsteps, then one can become a pure devotee. So this is the process. The process is that we are being recommended to strongly hear from a pure devotee. And Prabhupada ends this purport by saying, although the common man is often not as capable as so-called philosophers, faithful hearing from an authoritative person will help one transcend this material existence and go back to Godhead, back to home. So this simple principle that one need not be great philosopher, great scholar. Sometimes people think that when we go and talk to people, why don't you read Bhagavad Gita? They will say, no, I want to learn first Sanskrit, and then I want to read on my own, and then I want to understand. Or someone may think, oh, I will need to become a great philosopher, and then I will understand Bhagavad Gita. Until then, I will not read Bhagavad Gita. Actually, it is not recommended. It is not necessary, because it is very difficult to, because we have such short span of time and all the juggleries of this material world. If you were to go through them and understand the truth behind it, it's impossible. Therefore, a direct and simple, easy method has been recommended, that simply hear faithfully from an authoritative source. Then all the conclusions, all the philosophical understanding, all that is required, which is necessary for us to go back to home, back to God, is all provided. We don't have to an extra endeavor for something which is not given. So this is the process. So in order to understand the transcendental nature, the transcendental body of the Lord, we have to hear Hare Krishna Maha Mantra, hear from the bona fide spiritual master about the process of understanding the subject matters of self-realization. Then we can make advancement and realize these spiritual truths. Now, Prabhupada also says that the scholars, they do not understand this transcendental nature of the Supreme Lord. And therefore, when they write commentaries on Bhagavad Gita, they misinterpret and misguide the people. Because they also think Krishna is someone more knowledgeable or someone just slightly superior. So they do not tell people to actually surrender to the Supreme Lord. Why? Why the scholars are mistaken? So sometimes people fail to understand how the scholars can be wrong. They're so popular, their books are also being sold. They are being materially well qualified in some ways. So one may think, how can one say that these material scholars are at fault or not doing it right? So Prabhupada says the reasons why the scholars make mistake. So first is that they do not know the confidential activities of the Supreme Lord. So as we saw that even in the morning, we saw that everyone has a relationship with the Lord. And unless one does not establish that relationship with the Lord, one will not understand the confidential activities of the Lord. As we see in Bhagavad Gita also, Lord is explaining this knowledge to Arjuna. This is the most confidential knowledge. And Lord is explaining to Arjuna because he is his dear devotee. He is his dear friend. And he is not envious. So there are various characteristics. So Arjuna, being in a relationship of being a friend of the Lord, is able to understand this confidential message of the Lord. He is able to understand the confidential activities of the Lord. But if one has not developed a relationship with the Supreme Lord, then one will not be able to penetrate into this confidential mysteries. Although it looks very easy, but it is very hard, because this cannot be understood unless one does not have a relationship. What to speak of the Supreme Lord? Even if we do not have a relationship with another person, we cannot know about that person. We may only superficially see what that person appears like, what he's doing, but what is his intention? Why is he doing like that? What is his background? Who is he? What is the meaning behind his activities? Are not knowable unless one does not have a relationship. So similarly, the scholars not having a not rendering devotional service, not hearing from bona fide sources, they do not have a relationship with the Supreme Lord. And therefore, for them, these confidential activities of the Lord also appear like mundane activities. And therefore, they fail to penetrate, understand the glories of the Supreme Lord. Furthermore, they also fail to understand his different energies. As we know, Lord is not like one of us. Simply by his will, this entire cosmic manifestation is coming into existence. As we saw the other day, how this entire manifestation is coming into being for so many yugas, and then at the end, how it is being annihilated. How is this possible? Someone might think, oh, in order to do all these things, how much work I should do? Just to move few things, we need so much of endeavor to do. But imagine the entire cosmic manifestation to come into being and to dissolve it. How much work needs to be done? If someone were to be a mathematician or a physicist, if you were to calculate the amount of work that is required to be done, it will be just impossible to understand. But the Supreme Lord, simply by his will, is manifesting this material existence and he's also annihilating it. So, this different energies of the Lord, how is he doing? What is he? It's very difficult for a mundane person to understand, a scholar to understand. So he thinks that, oh no, this is not possible by Supreme Lord who's appearing here. He cannot do these things. So they, by not developing the right service attitude, the hearing from the bona fide sources, and failing to understand the Lord, his activities, his different energies, they may mistake him to be another common man. And therefore, they cannot understand the transcendental qualities of the Lord. The transcendental qualities of the Lord are not easy to understand. They require the mercy of a pure devotee. Without that, one cannot penetrate into this subject matter of transcendental knowledge. And therefore, association with a pure devotee is must to penetrate into the transcendental aspects of this confidential knowledge. Otherwise, it will look mundane. It will look something like what we see in this material world. Then Prabhupada therefore criticizes, in the sense, Prabhupada says that these people are foolish scholars. And Prabhupada is very strong to say that anyone who considers Krishna to be an ordinary being, actually they are foolish. And it is also important to note that Prabhupada is stating here that there is another quality of Krishna which is very unique, is that he is the only one who can give liberation. No one else can give liberation. Can a common man give liberation? No. Everyone is bound by the strict laws of material nature. Everyone is struggling in their own existence. Where is the question of liberating anyone else? One himself is struggling in this material existence. And therefore, this quality of the Supreme Lord is also not understood by scholars. And therefore, they think, oh, what is the necessity to surrender to the Supreme Lord? I will find a way, I will intellectually do something and be able to understand myself, understand this world, and be able to live a life which will be freed from sufferings. Actually, it is not possible unless one takes the shelter of the Supreme Lord. That is the only way. But to reach this conclusion is so difficult. Manushanam Sahasreshu. Even though one may, for many, many lifetimes, try different endeavors, but even may come to the point of understanding the Brahman aspect. But to understand that Bhavanam Janmanam Ante Gnanavan Mam Prapatyate, that I should actually take shelter of the Supreme Lord is not an easy thing. So this is another quality of the Lord which is also not understood by the scholars, and therefore they also mistake Krishna to be another ordinary person. Now Prabhupada also explains that the material energy. So sometimes when people, the Mayavadis, when Lord appears in this material world, they think that the Lord's body is also material. They think anything which has a form is material. For them, there can be no form which is spiritual. Spiritual means no form. Avyaktam, aksharam. So for them, it's very abstract. So if they see anything very clear, oh, there is a form, then they will immediately think it's material. Therefore, they are in this wrong conception that when the Lord also appears in this material world, he is also influenced by the material energy, and therefore he has got a form like a human being. So this is the misunderstanding. Actually, the Lord, as we see in the 4th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, where the discussion between Arjuna and Krishna, where when Krishna says that I explain this knowledge to the sun god, Vivaswan, and then to Manu, and Vivaswan instructed to Manu, and Manu instructed to Ikshvaku. So then we see that Arjuna asking that how am I to understand all these things? That you are junior, or you appeared now, whereas sun god is existing for so many years. How can I understand that you actually instructed this to the sun god Vivaswan? So that's where Lord says, Sri Bhagavan Vacha, Bahuni me Vyatitani, Janmani Tavacha Arjuna, Tani Aham Veda Sarvani, Natvam Veda Parantapa. So Lord says, the blessed Lord said, many births, both you and I have passed. I can remember all of them, but you cannot pose appear of the enemy. So here again we see that the Lord, his Advaitam, his body and himself are non-different. The people, the Mayavadis, they think that the Lord, when he appears, his body is different, his spirit is different. But Lord is not different. When he appears, he comes by his own internal potency, Atma Maya. And therefore, because he comes by his Atma Maya, his own internal potency, he can remember everything in the past, in the future, in the present. He is not like one of us. Because we change our bodies, we forget our past. But because the Lord appears in his original form, in his spiritual form, he has no forgetfulness. He can remember everything. And therefore, it is important to recognize the Lord's appearance and Lord's body and form and are not different. And in the very next verse also Lord says, Ajopi san avyayatma bhutanam ishvaropi san prakritim swam adhisthaya sambhavami atma maya. Although I am unborn and my transcendental body never deteriorates, and although I am the Lord of all sentient beings, I still appear in every millennium in my original transcendental form. So Atma Maya and my internal energy. So Lord's manifestation is not like one of our manifestation that we come into this existence by the force of material energy. Material energy gives us a body, and therefore we take a certain form of the body in this material world, whereas the Lord, upon his own sweet will, he appears to recollect the fallen souls, to attract them to his pastimes. So his appearance is very different. It is not like ours. And therefore, this wrong conception of the Mayavadis that the Lord is also influenced by material energy is false. And Prabhupada is refuting that idea that the Lord's appearance, Lord being influenced by material energy, is also wrong, because we see from the verses, Mama Maya Duratyaya, that if one takes shelter of the Supreme Lord, one can overcome the influence of material energy. So if I'm able to take shelter of the Supreme Lord, and if I, a small living entity, can overcome the influence of material energy, then how that the Lord, who is supreme, can come under the influence of material energy? That is not appropriate. That is not making any sense. And therefore, this conception that he also has a material body is actually foolish. And then Prabhupada also goes on to say that how that the Supreme Lord is able to control the smallest of the smallest and the largest of the largest the universal cosmic manifestation. So his ability to control his Yogam Aishwaram, his inconceivable transcendental energy, is unfathomable. One cannot understand how is this happening. How can, for a common person who sees the Lord as appearing as a child, Lord performing various activities, it will be very hard for one to understand how that it can see that even Brahma got bewildered, Indra got bewildered. So if the so-called great demigods are bewildered, it is quite possible for a common man to mistake that, oh, this small boy is able to do all these things. But unless one is not a devotee, unless one is not in knowledge in the Shastras, it is very difficult to understand the inconceivable potency of the Supreme Lord, as how he is coming here, how his appearance, how he is doing all these things. Therefore, unless we don't go through these literatures like Bhagavad Gita and Srimad Bhagavatam, our faith and conviction and understanding the Lord will not be very strong. Therefore, unless we do not read, just like people say that I do not believe in all these things, but if you don't read, how can you understand? How can you refute anything? So in this way, there are various reasons Prabhupada gives about how the Supreme Lord is not a common man. And then Prabhupada briefly explains about the various activities of the Lord. So Prabhupada gives two examples here. That Prabhupada says that when Lord appeared as the son of Vasudeva and Devaki, he appeared in the 400 form. Now, no child we can see to appear in 400 form, but upon the prayers of Mother Devaki and Vasudeva, again the Lord appeared as a child. So these are not ordinary things. These are not any common activities. So we can see from Srimad Bhagavatam so many wonderful activities of the Supreme Lord, which are all inconceivable for the common man. But actually, his activities, when understood, as even in the 4th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, actually there's wonderful description about the Lord's activities. Actually, it is said that even if one understands that the Lord's activities are not like the activities that we do. So we do activities so that we want to gain something. We do activities that we get a reaction to it. But the Lord's activities are not because he wants something, neither he has any reaction for his activities. His activities are transcendental, divyam. So even if one understands that the activities of the Lord are transcendental, his activities are not like the karmic activities that the living entity does. It is said that even he will be liberated. So the activities of the Lord are very special, are very unique. And therefore, the devotees meditate on the activities of the Lord. Because they're not of this mundane characteristic, they are divyam, they are transcendental. So the activities of the Lord, similarly, the Lord appearing, giving the Vishwarupa darshan to Arjuna, and then Arjuna again offers prayers that, this is so difficult for me to see. Can you please come back to your original form? So these are again the wonderful activities of the Lord, which are not any common man can do any of these activities. So in this way, there are so many wonderful activities of the Lord. There are many places Lord himself says, Matta Parataram Nanyat, there is nothing superior to me. And we will also see, as now in the next chapters, the Chatushloki Bhagavad Gita and Aham Hi Adir Devana. So the Lord will further explain his opulences, by which one can see that it is not of any ordinary man. So finally, Prabhupada quotes a verse from Srimad Bhagavatam, which the Mayavadis, this comes in the Kapila Deva's instructions on the science of devotional service, the process of devotional service. So where it is said, Aham sarveshu bhuteshu bhutatma avastitah sada tam avajnaya mam martyaha kurute vidambanam. I am present in every living entity as a super soul. If someone neglects or disregards that super soul everywhere and engages himself in the worship of the deity in the temple, that is simply imitation. So the Mayavadis, when it is said Aham Sarveshu Bhuteshu, that I am present everywhere, they mistake that thinking that the Lord is present, like I am also Lord, you are also Lord, everyone is Lord. So they misunderstand this that the Lord is everywhere and therefore he is Brahman kind of understanding. But actually, as Prabhupada mentions, that whenever these kinds of things are said, one should refer to authoritative sources. And Prabhupada is quoting Jiva Goswami. Prabhupada is referring to Jiva Goswami and his interpretation and his explanation of this verse. And Prabhupada is also explaining this purport and in this verse that the Aham Sarveshu Bhuteshu is referring to the Lord as super soul being present in every living entity, both actually all the living entities and also the non-living entities, even the atoms. So this is another important aspect, that a devotee is not that he's just simply worshipping the Lord and he has no conception of anything else. No. Actually, a devotee has a complete understanding of the Lord, both in the form of Archa Vigraha form, Lord in the spiritual world, and also his creation and his presence as the super soul in every living entity. Therefore, Prabhupada talks about three kinds of devotees: the neophyte, the uh, the second stage, and the third stage. So basically, a neophyte devotee only focuses on the worshipping the Lord in the temple. He does not understand the significance of others, the devotees, other living entities, the envious people. He cannot understand the distinction between these different categories of people as how they are different. So his focus is only on worshipping the Lord. So Jiva Goswami says this is not very, so wants that this sort of mentality should be corrected. So to not give due respect to others is not something that is very pleasing to the Lord. In the 12th chapter of the law, in the 12th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, we see various qualities of pure devotees or of devotees which are very pleasing to the Lord. And to give proper respect is one of them. It's not to be envious of others, to mistreat anyone, or to put someone in anxiety. This is not appropriate. And therefore, one must recognize that the Lord is also present in everyone's heart. And here it is said, therefore, every body is the embodiment or the temple of the Supreme Lord. And as such, as one offers respect to the temple of the Lord, it should similarly properly respect each and everybody in whom the Paramatma dwells. So you can see here, Prabhupada is mentioning one should similarly properly respect each and everybody in whom the Paramatma dwells. Again, Prabhupada is not just saying human beings, in each and every body in whom the Paramatma dwells. So therefore, Nectar of Instruction very wonderfully talks about how each of the devotees have to be worshipped, how one who is chanting the holy name of the Lord must be honored in the mind, how one who has taken initiation and worshipping the deity and rendering devotional service must be offered obeisances, and how one must associate and serve very faithfully one who is a pure devotee, the Uttamadhikari. So we must understand how to associate with different categories of devotees, how to associate with the Lord and His creation, and not to mistake that, okay, I will only understand the Lord in the form of the Archa and everything else is irrelevant. So the last point in the purport, Prabhupada talks about sometimes people deride, why do you need temple worship? Lord is present everywhere, so why should you restrict him to be worshipped in the temple? But Prabhupada is immediately countering by saying, if God is everywhere, why is he not in the temple or in the form of the deity? So this arguments between the personalist and impersonalist will, with one another, Prabhupada says, will fight with one another perpetually. So this will go on. There will be different class of people who will be arguing in different ways. But for a devotee, he sees the Lord everywhere. So one who engages in Krishna conscious activities, the activities of the soul. So this Bhakti Yoga process is to activate the activities of the soul and to nullify the activities of the senses and the mind, in the sense that the mind and senses are usually engaged in material activities, but when they're purified, then one is actually performing the activities of the soul. So when we actually perform the activities of the soul in proper devotional service, then by the mercy of the Lord, uh, even the slight mercy of the Lord, we can understand Him. And Prabhupada says that we cannot understand the Supreme Lord because He is unlimited. But whatever we can understand, we should understand. And Prabhupada says, even if one understands that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, that itself is very good. So as we see, this is wonderful explanation by Prabhupada, covering a lot of things. It's a nice purpose. We should read again and again and try to meditate on this wonderful explanation of Prabhupada. I'll stop here and see if there are any questions or comments.